Good evening, everybody. If we could have everybody grab a seat, we can get started and stick to our time schedule. Wow, that worked. I'm amazed. Well, good evening. I'm Dan Beal. I'm the president of the West Pasadena Residents Association. I'm joined tonight by Nina Chomsky, the president of the Vista-Annendale Association, and Erica Foy, the vice president of the Madison Heights Neighborhood Association. I want to start out by thanking Maranatha School for making this wonderful facility available to us. I want to thank the candidates for sharing their time with us tonight. Really appreciate that. I know they're all very busy. I want to thank all of you for showing up. This is an amazing turnout. I'm so glad to see you all here, and I'd like to close by thanking the hardworking WPRA board members and advisory council members who worked very hard to put this together, especially Justin Chapman. Where's Justin? Hey, Justin worked very hard on this for a lot of hours, and I want to make sure we thank him. So I'd like to start out tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please rise? Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. You know, there's an old saying that all politics are local. Given current events, you may not entirely believe that, but I think what that means is the things that impact your daily lives, the things that are closest to you, the things you live with every day, are the result of local politics. Every trip you take starts on a local street. Your local first responders are the ones that come to help you when you need help. You have clean water, your trash is picked up, potholes are filled or not, trees are trimmed or not, your neighborhood character is protected, there's good schools, your library is stocked with wonderful things to read. And you get what I'm saying. What influences and shapes your daily life is determined largely locally. There's local laws, regulations, and policies adopted by city councils and enforced by city staffs. Your quality of life is why it's so important that you and the candidates are here tonight. I'd like to also invite Erica and Nina to say a couple of words too.
Hi, and good evening. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Linda Vista-Annendale Association, LVAA, and we have the honor of partnering on this event. But I want to thank the WPRA because they did all the work, and we're here to be a partner. But I want to say that our relationship with WPRA and with Madison Heights Neighborhood Association has never been stronger. The three associations are working more closely together. We're going to work together in the future because we're stronger as three associations than one on all the challenges to single-family neighborhoods and the challenges in the city of Pasadena. Every election we say it's the most important, but this one really is maybe the most important in many years. And my final word for LVAA is we're having our pancake breakfast on Saturday morning. Please come if you live. But anyone's invited, LVAA or, area or not. Thank you. We're at the Fire Station 38 on Linda Vista Avenue beginning at 8:30.
Hi, Erica Foy with Madison Heights Neighborhood Association. Thank you guys for all being here, everyone for participating. It's really exciting for Madison Heights to be part of this evening. Just kind of want to just repeat what Nina said, that we are stronger together. And if any of you would like to come introduce yourself and you're from Madison Heights and we haven't met yet, I would love to chat afterwards. Anyways, thank you very much for attending tonight.
Thank you, Erica and Nina. Now I'd like to introduce our WPA board member and treasurer, Blaine Kavanaugh, who's going to talk a bit about how we're going to run the evening and what to expect. Blaine?
Good evening, and thank you for being here. As Dan said, I'm Blaine Kavanaugh, longtime WPRA board member, treasurer, and your moderator for this evening. Tonight's program is going to focus, as you've already heard, on questions relating to local issues and the local effects of larger issues, things that affect us here, whether it's national, state, or whatever. But the effect of local issues, the effect on local issues. We've got a lot of issues, a lot of candidates, so we're going to spend a fair amount of time. The timeline for tonight is first questions from the WPRA with also contributions from Madison Heights and LVAA. Then around 8 o'clock, we'll switch to questions from you. Now the questions from the audience will need to be posed at the question mic over on that side of the room. So I'll give you a little bit of warning when we get to that part of the program. If you want to ask a question, you'll need to head over in that direction. At 8:30, we'll close with 3-minute closing statements from each of the candidates. Most of the candidates, perhaps all of them, will stick around afterwards to chat. So questions you don't get a chance to answer, you'll be able to pose directly to them then. Logistics for the evening. I think you know at least one of the exits on that side. There is another exit on that side. Since we have a long meeting, there are also bathrooms here, both men's and women's, and I would encourage you, whenever you desire, to make use of that rather than holding out for the end of the meeting. The same applies to the candidates. But if you miss a question, we'll come back to you. Let me quickly introduce the candidates here in front, and thank you all for being here. For the mayoral office, we have, in alphabetical order, Pasadena Council member and attorney Victor Gordo, entrepreneur Jason Hardin, our current mayor Terry Tornek, and businessman marketer Major Williams. We can applaud the mayoral candidates. Some people have asked why we have all the candidates together. Well, at early planning stages for this, we considered having 2 separate forums or have one session for District 6 and one session for the mayor. As we developed the questions and as questions were submitted, it became clear that they were the same questions for everyone. So we put it together in a way that will allow us to handle more questions in less time than we would have had otherwise. But since the District 6 candidates are here as well, we'll introduce them too. Mr. Ryan Bell, nonprofit manager. Ms. Tamerlin Godley, attorney. Mr. Steve Madison, Pasadena City Council member. Thank you. Our questioners for the first portion of the meeting are 2 longtime WPRA associates, past president of the WPRA and current member of the WPRA's Advisory Council, Vince Farhat. You'll see him over there. And also Justin Chapman, past board member and secretary, and also member of the WPRA Advisory Council, who, as you heard, has done the lion's share of the coordination and assembly development of the questions. So you all know what we've told the candidates. They'll each have their own turn to answer questions first. We'll rotate through all the candidates, so every candidate gets a chance to answer a question. They can pass if they choose, but they don't get to then come back and make it up. For this portion, they'll have 2 minutes for each answer. I will do my best to enforce that. We'll see how that goes. And I think we're ready to go with our first question. So, Justin.
Hello, thanks for being here. Pasadena, along with the rest of Los Angeles and California, is experiencing a housing crisis. The average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Pasadena is now well over $2,000. This is contributing to homelessness and causing families to leave Pasadena, resulting in lower enrollment at PUSD schools and thus school closures. How will you address the 2 separate but related crises of affordable housing and homelessness? In just 2 minutes.
2 minutes each, and we're going to start, and I have told her in advance, so this is not just cold. Ms. Godley will start, and then we'll rotate through the panel.
Well, good evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you to the neighborhood associations for putting this together. As I was walking door to door, a lot of people were really interested in this event. And walking door to door, I've met a lot of you and heard a lot of your concerns, and homelessness is the #1 concern that I've heard about. So we need to think about two different parts of that. First is falling into homelessness. There are 4 main populations that fall into homelessness: people falling on hard times, emancipated foster youth, people coming out of jail, and veterans. So the part that the city can do the most about are people falling onto financial hard times. Right now we have a national model where we let people fall into homelessness, and then we spend more resources to find them, count them, and then get them back into housing. There are some programs that are starting where when someone's about to be evicted, the city gets notice of it, they send a social worker out, they talk with the person about their family resources, nonprofit resources, city resources, pay their back rent if that makes sense to do, to keep them in housing and stabilize them in some future rent as well. In a program in Chicago, a year after someone has received services, 75% of the people are still in housing. Sometimes people just need that help at the right time, and we need to be proactive in that model. The other populations that are falling into homelessness, emancipated youth, we need to really push the county to make sure they're funding the programs that are out there. No foster youth should be emancipated to the streets. I was talking with the executive director of Sycamores, and she was saying they have programs in place. The county's just not funding it. We need to use our city clout to push them to do so. In jails, people coming out of jail have an 80% recidivism rate, but there are some programs that are providing housing and job training, and they're cutting the recidivism rate from 80% to 20%, and also reducing those people falling into homelessness. We need to push the county to scale up those programs. I don't know if anyone's timing, and I didn't time myself, so I'm not sure where we are, but the second part of that is chronic homelessness. Chronic homelessness is what we see on the streets.
And your time is up.
Thank you. Is there going to be anyone who does like a 30 seconds or anything?
Okay.
I'll try and watch it on my clock. Thank you.
Mr. Hardin?
Hello. Homelessness is a very dear issue to me. I've been homeless as a child with my family, and after I graduated Pasadena High School, I was homeless again, and I used to have to take the bus from downtown Los Angeles just to have a place to sleep at 45 minutes to an hour at a time. So I take this issue very seriously. I think one way that we can combat the homeless and the housing issue is by establishing an affordable housing commission. There is a lot of technology and a lot of innovative ideas, including tiny homes, 3D printed homes, and a lot of policy changes that can be made. So it requires constant dialogue, and that dialogue can come from Affordable Housing Commission. And even as a former senior commissioner for the city of Pasadena, I helped establish a standing committee on senior housing because seniors are the fastest growing population in our state. And if we don't pay attention to how seniors are able to afford staying home or placement issues or whatnot, if we're not paying attention to that, then we're all going to fall into it at some point. So I believe Affordable Housing Commission is definitely a start. And like I said, the constant dialogue is necessary when it comes to addressing housing issues. And we can't just wait for meetings to come up when they do. We have to have constant dialogue. So Affordable Housing Commission is that. But I also admire the work that your neighborhood group has done in regards to strengthening our inclusionary housing ordinance. And I do believe that has to be strengthened constantly. You know, it
30
requires,
seconds.
Excuse me? Oh, thank you.
30 seconds. You have to be
Oh, no problem. I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bell?
Thank you so much for having this forum and for inviting me and for, of course, everyone who helped put this together. It's great to see so many people out engaged on these important issues. Just 2 nights ago, many of us I think all of us, in fact, were at a forum exclusively on housing and affordability and homelessness issues. This is an issue that touches me personally. When I first moved to Pasadena, I lived in Northwest Pasadena at an apartment roughly at the corner of Los Robles and Washington, and I had affordable rent. I was very fortunate until my landlord decided that he wanted to raise the rent by 110%. and he gave me 2 months to get out. And I thought for sure that would be illegal, so I began to research the laws here in Pasadena. I had been involved for over 10 years as a housing rights advocate in Los Angeles, and what I discovered was that there were no protections for tenants at all. Anybody could be evicted with 60 days notice for no reason. It's almost like your at-will employment. It's like at-will housing. They can just take 60 days and throw you out. So luckily that's not the case anymore, thanks to some state legislation that went into effect a few weeks ago. I worked in affordable housing services at PATH for many years in Silver Lake, building affordable housing. I didn't build it myself, but involved in raising public support and political will for building affordable housing in communities around our region, and working, in fact, with Union Station in some cases to help build some of the affordable housing that we have here.
30 seconds.
I think it's important also to consider keeping tenants housed. Tamerlin touched on this a second ago, and I'm, as you probably know, a strong advocate for rent control. I think we need to address this issue even more strongly than we have. An article that came out recently in the LA Times shows that over the last decade, rents have gone up 65%, while incomes have only gone up for renters about 35%. And so you can see what happens when people are living on fixed incomes. They simply cannot afford to stay where they are, and this is fueling people entering homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Thank you.
Mr. Gordo.
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Victor Gordo, and I hope to be your next mayor. I know the housing issue well. You know, my first home in Pasadena was a garage, and I know what that's like. You know, but we need a comprehensive strategy in Pasadena for, one, the retention of existing affordable housing, and two, to continue to do our part. And we've done that. In District 5, the district that I represent on the City Council, we've constructed 5 of the last 6 projects, and we have the 7th one coming. But housing, how many of you believe we're going to build our way out of this? Raise your hand. Nobody. 1. Okay. How many of you believe that it's a regional issue? Raise your hand. I believe it's a regional issue. In 2018, our incumbent pulled us out of the San Gabriel Council of Governments. That's a body, a regional body, 31 cities, 29 municipalities, 29 school districts, 3 supervisorial seats, all working together to address the issue as a regional issue, and Pasadena is not represented. We need to work with our neighbors, not dismiss our neighbors, and work with them to ensure that as Pasadena does its part on the homeless issue, we return to the Council of Governments. I voted no on that motion, and I continue to believe it's a mistake. The Council of Governments has now, as an example, set up a housing trust fund, is in the process of working as a region to address the issue of housing as a regional issue.
30 seconds.
And Pasadena is not at that table. You know, there's a time in Pasadena where we led on issues like homelessness, on issues like housing. There was a time when Pasadena was a leader among its peers. We are the best and greatest city, I think, on the issue of housing. We should continue to do our part, work with the county on the mental health component of it, continue to do our part locally, and lead as a regional leader and reclaim our seat at the table on the San Gabriel Council of Governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordo. Mr. Madison.
Thank you. I think as we move around and campaign and appear at forums, certainly homelessness and affordable housing are at the top of any list of importance for our community. I think they're related issues with a great deal of overlap, but somewhat separate. And in 2 minutes, I would say that we've worked hard on the council to address these issues. Certainly we have more work to be done. First, I want to point out that I spearheaded the council's move to raise the minimum wage a year and a half or so ago. And I think it's important to remember that as we address these problems of affordability and the gap between the haves and the have-nots, it's important to remember things like the minimum wage and a fair and living wage. In terms of housing, I was on the council when we adopted the inclusionary housing ordinance back in 2001. There was strong opposition to it. There were threats of litigation and the sky is falling and the like, and I was one of the champions of that ordinance, and I was one of the co-sponsors last summer when we strengthened the ordinance, taking it in many cases from 15% inclusionary up to 20% of inclusionary units to provide that affordable housing that that we need. I'm very proud that in my council district, in our council district in West Pasadena, which is seen certainly as the city on a hill, you know, the image of great affluence and advantage, which we have the second highest number of affordable units in any council district in the city. And I'm very, very, very proud of that.
30 seconds.
Also proud of the Habitat for Humanity homes that we built, and we worked for years on this. We have 9 single-family homes for ownership. We have 9 families, 3 returning veteran families. We have 29 school-age and younger children in that project. I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm proud that in my district, we actually bought a Caltrans home to site a 3-bedroom home for 3 single low to moderate income women who live in that house, and the neighborhood's accepted it.
Thank you, Mr. Madison.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Major Williams. I'm happy to be here today to get an opportunity to vet some of these questions and answer them to the best of my capabilities, of course. When it comes to housing, we most definitely understand that it's a national, it's a statewide, and most definitely it's a local issue that we all have to figure out how to combat it. Over the year that I've been working in communities, I've been talking with different residents. Beyond that, I've been meeting with different groups and foundations that we have here in the city, simply because, say for instance, like the CEO of Union Station. And one of the main reasons why I had that conversation to bring it full circle is because you know, I want to know what's available and what's working right now for our citizens and our homeless community. Not that they are most definitely, they go hand in hand together, but they do create a ripple effect when it comes to the totality of it. And so what I did was I was able to make an assessment and try to see, you know, what services were available and see the percentage of the things that were working and the things that wasn't working. And what I wanted to, and what I got from that is understanding that, kind of like what Tammy was saying, is that we have to catch some of these families beforehand. It's very important that we start to catch some of these families beforehand, because we can actually stop them from going into a deeper cycle of homelessness. And we also, beyond just talking about services, I think it's really time for us to start focusing on economics. My background and the history that I've had working with thousands of people, changing the narrative in regards to economics is actually helping you to be able to make more so you can afford it. So we can fight multiple fights. We can fight to have affordable housing, but we also need to start fighting from a leadership perspective and telling our citizens that collectively together we can actually make more. And I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek?
Thank you, and thank you all for coming and subjecting yourself to all this. It's appropriate that this question should be the first question posed to all of us. I've been walking the city, as I have wanted to do for the past 9 months, and this is the #1 issue that gets raised at the doorstep by people. I think Pasadena is making real progress in this issue. I'm proud that among the 88 cities in Los Angeles County, Pasadena is one of 2 that actually experienced a decline in the homeless population over the past year. County went up 16%, Pasadena went down 20%. We were out counting this week, so we'll find out how we're doing going forward. But we have a long way to go. On any given night in Pasadena, there are 300 people sleeping on the street, and that's just not acceptable. We are taking firm steps. We have an inclusionary housing ordinance that's been referenced. We've increased the percentage of units in any new development that must be now 20% rather than 15%. The kind of intervention program that's been referenced to keep people who may just be 1 paycheck short of rent, we've already got that in place. We have rapid rehousing programs. I think we have to begin to work harder at preserving existing affordable housing. It's been suggested that we should turn to affordability covenants as a relatively low-cost way of keeping affordable housing that's already affordable in place. We need to make use of city land. We're talking with churches about making use of their surplus land.
30 seconds.
We have county land and state land that may be available. These are all issues that I've been dealing with for my whole adult life. Both as planning director and as a volunteer, I've been working on providing affordable housing for more than 25 years, and I take this very seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. It's time for our next question. Just so people learn how this program is going to work, Ms. Godley answered first for the last question. The first person to answer for this question will be Mr. Hardin.
Hi, good evening. This question is inspired by the Linda Vista-Annendale Association in Madison Heights, and it has to do with local control. In the past few years, in an effort to address the housing crisis, the state has passed laws, particularly the ones concerning accessory dwelling units or granny flats, and Senate Bill 50, that severely constrain the ability of local cities to set their own land use policies, which has set the stage to eliminate potentially single-family zoning and placing our historic neighborhoods at risk of overdevelopment and loss of identity. What, if elected, what are you going to do to help restore local control over planning and housing?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that I am in favor of the ADUs and all the restriction alleviations that are made to help generate more housing for our community. I believe, like I said, we are in a affordable housing crisis, and I know that these ADUs, whether they be attached or detached, they kind of run lower than market value apartments of that size. So I do appreciate the opportunities that they create in addressing our affordable housing issue. I do understand that, like I said, a lot of people have concerns with protecting single-family homes and neighborhoods, and I do believe that these new adjustments in our state laws are going to not demolish those single-family homes or not ruin those neighborhoods, but it just creates an incentive to create more affordable housing. It just creates those opportunities. Not everybody's going to take that opportunity. Not everybody can afford those opportunities, but they'll at least be there to help alleviate the issue. So I'm totally in support of it. I don't think we should take any legal action to circumvent that in any way. I do believe we should comply and absolutely create that opportunity to increase our stock of affordable units. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Bell?
As a general rule, I think local control is ideal, right? I want control over my personal life. I don't want necessarily people telling me what to do with my time or my money. But I also recognize that I don't live alone. I'm not living alone on an island somewhere. I have neighbors. I have family that I'm accountable to. I have a boss that I'm accountable to. And they have a say in my life. Pasadena's District 6 is important as a district, but it's also related to the rest of Pasadena. And Pasadena is related, as Mr. Gordo has said, to the greater San Gabriel Valley. And the greater San Gabriel Valley in Los Angeles is related to the state of California. And the things that we do here aren't isolated from those environments. And so I think it's the state is acting now because a lot of communities, perhaps Pasadena has not been the worst at this, but a lot of communities have not done what they can and should do to create housing opportunities for people in need and for middle-class people as well. And so I don't think it's ideal that the state mandate these things, but if I were a state legislator, I would be looking out for what I could do to solve this crisis too, because they're under the microscope as well. So I like others here, I would not be in favor of litigation. I think that's wasted money that could be spent building affordable housing and doing things here locally. I think we should cooperate with state
30
officials
seconds.
and do what we can to modify parts of these laws that we don't particularly favor and try to do our best to demonstrate that we're complying with the spirit of the law and find ways to adapt to the needs as they exist. I think the panic around ADUs is a little overblown. I think not everyone is going to build an ADU tomorrow in their backyard. Some of you probably already have ADUs in your backyard. And some will want to do that for their families or for tenancy so that they can help pay their mortgage. And I think that's a good thing and helps alleviate the shortage of affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gordo?
So, you know, I think it confuses the issue to make this about ADUs. It's about local control. It's about Pasadenans controlling the destiny of our city. You know, over 100 years of sound judgment has gone into creating this city. And we can't let anyone take away our local control, particularly not when Pasadena is doing its part. I was actually on the city council. Mr. Madison and I are the only ones who are on the city council when Pasadena led and adopted an inclusionary housing ordinance. In my district, we replaced liquor stores with affordable housing. Pasadena, it's doing its part. We can't allow the state or anyone else to take away our authority and our ability to control how this city evolves in the future. And that's what the state is doing. They're penalizing the city of Pasadena and its residents and other cities that are doing their part for what other regions and other cities are not doing. And so I oppose the state's intrusion into local control because it will at some point affect the fabric. It's already affecting the fabric of our city. This is very real, and we need to push back. We need to push back first, again, by joining our neighbors, joining the region, the San Gabriel Council of Governments. There should not be one of 31 cities missing from that effort. And two, we ought to consider legislative changes together with our
30
neighbors.
seconds.
But we can't do it alone. With this one-size-fits-all approach that the state has taken, penalizing Pasadena is wrong. We need to press the state to be more precise and surgical in its approach. Development in a mature city like Pasadena is very different than it would be in other parts of the state, including some of the counties around us, or even to the North County of Lancaster or San Bernardino and Riverside. The state actually needs to do its job to recognize that they need to be more surgical and more precise and allow cities like Pasadena to determine their own destiny and at the same time encourage others to do their part.
Mr. Madison?
So, there are physicists at Caltech that say the shortest amount of time that they've been able to measure is the time it takes a newly elected state legislator to forget what it was like being a local official. And we experience this, as you've already heard, regularly with state mandates and encroachments, in our view, on local zoning control. And we really do feel strongly in Pasadena that we should have local zoning control. And I'm inserting the word zoning because I do think we need to be a little careful. We have some history in our country that isn't so proud around euphemisms like local control or at large. Sometimes that can be sort of code for other things that we do not believe in here in Pasadena. So in terms of the accessory dwelling units, we had for some time a moratorium so that one could not build a new ADU, a granny flat, if you will. And the state imposed legislation that required us to lift that moratorium. And the truth is we've had essentially a few dozen or more applications, and we've built a handful of new units, but it has not been a floodgate or the opening of some massive stream of ADUs. And I think in part that's because we have imposed, pursuant to the legislation and consistent with it, appropriate local regulation of it in terms of lot size and ensuring that the quality of life of the neighborhoods, which is paramount in Pasadena for us,
30 seconds.
Not be compromised. I think relationships with our state officials are extremely important. I'm very proud that Anthony Portantino and Chris Holden have each endorsed me. I think I may be the only thing the two of them agree on, if you know Anthony and Chris, but they were able, Anthony in fact was able to kill SB 50 last time, but it's coming back. And now we have new legislation about 2 ADUs per unit, and we are considering legal challenge to that at the council as we speak. So,
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Mr. Williams?
Yeah, so my thought process out the gate once this question came about, I support it, but I also have a certain pause in regards to why I support it. So one of the ideals that I had was to support it under the pretense of seeing how it actually plays out. In my 42 years of existence on this earth, evolution happens, even in the time that I've been here. And so the fact that, we've just heard that we've had 100 years of sound judgment, I don't know if that's the case because, even with the black community here, 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, it was 21%. If you fast forward now, it's only 4%. And so those particular decisions have been detrimental to a lot of different communities and districts in this particular city. And so we really have to caution on how we pat ourselves on the back when it comes to our track record and our longevity of sound decisions. Now, when it comes to the ADUs, I 100% support it out the gate, but I wanted to implement something. If I was a mayor, I will implement something no different than what the current council did when it comes to the marijuana. I would put a hard pause and have a reevaluation after 2 years. During that 2 years, we truly get a chance to peel the lens back and see if it was deemed detrimental, if it was such a scary thing, if it was impactful to our communities, or we all toast and cheers and say congratulations, we were able to have affordable housing and solve some of our issues and our problems. Because
30
at the end of the
seconds.
day, it's really about people and human beings and taking care of them and making sure that we are, as a city, are hand in hand in creating services and opportunity for the people that are here in Pasadena. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek?
So I think the state has clearly badly overreached in the area of accessory dwelling units. In fact, control over those sort of land use controls are one of the fundamental reasons for local government. And so to have the state come in and ride roughshod over us this way is offensive and dangerous. And as has been pointed out, housing is not the only area where this is happening, but it's probably the most dramatic. The state is moving in this direction on the basis that we're confronted in California with an existential housing crisis. And there is a housing crisis. And so they feel this is justified, and they view it through the prism of really the Bay Area, because the people who are generating this legislation and our governor are all sort of Bay Area politicians. And so that's the solutions they come up with are generated by that reality. Last year, I raised the possibility of litigation in my State of the City address because I was so offended. I've now been persuaded by listening to some experts and to some residents that that's not necessarily the most effective response. The city had made modifications, which has now generated 177 applications for ADUs, where we had 4 or 5 over a 10-year period. So we were making progress even without the state overreach. We were making progress, unlike some of, part of the reason for not wanting to do litigation is because I don't want to be put in the bucket with cities who are really housing resistant, like many of our San Gabriel Valley neighbors. I think Pasadena needs to lead by example, and I think the way we do that is to try to modify the legislation, and I've already begun those discussions with our legislative delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
So there are real concerns about ADUs in terms of parking and congestion and blight and use by Airbnbs. There may be places where ADUs are appropriate, but they should be made here. I also really question the premise. We're not going to be able to build our way out of this issue of affordability. That premise is that if we build enough housing, we'll have a glut and prices will drop. We're not going to be able to do that. It would create a type of congestion that we're not willing to live with. So we have to look at affordability differently. We have to think about things like rent to own, where people don't have to have a down payment but build it up over time. We have to think of what kind of subsidies we have for people so that people can get into housing. We have to think of things like artist collectives, where people have their own sleeping space but share communal space. We're going to have to think creatively. We're not going to be able to build our way out of this affordability crisis. So I really question the premise about ADUs.
Thank you. It's time for our next question. And as we rotate through, Mr. Bell, you will be the first person to respond to this question.
Now that the 710 tunnel is officially dead, pause for applause, what steps will you take to acquire the 710 freeway stub from the state? How are you planning to engage the community in the development of those 50 acres, and what do you think should be done with that land?
Thank you. Great question, and probably the most important and interesting District 6 specific question I think that we're talking about during this election cycle. I think the process is already underway. I attended the forum that Mr. Madison held a few weeks ago at the Civic Center, or at the Convention Center, to talk with members of Caltrans and our planning department and our transportation department about the process that we'll go through to acquire that land back. So that absolutely needs to continue apace. We have this tremendous opportunity to plan this area and to restore it. It's not land that wasn't there before, it's land that was there and was taken away. And we have an opportunity to put it back. I think it needs to include a robust conversation with all of our neighbors. And I know, as I've listened to Steve Madison talk about this, that this conversation has been going on for a number of years. And I think that's a great start. And We need to continue that and start again in many senses to see what the community wants to do with that land. When I was working in the city of Los Angeles as a pastor of a church in Hollywood, it was my honor to bring community together around many contentious community issues. And I think it's going to be difficult for all of us to agree about what goes there. But I think to keep our eyes focused on the opportunity that we have to build affordable housing, to create open spaces, green spaces, and improve our transportation plan at the same time. I think these things are all things that we can do. We can create a beautiful cityscape there and make it walkable, make it accessible to all members of our city that want to access that space and really heal a wound that's sort of a gash between neighborhoods in our community. I look forward to being a part of that process, whether I'm a council member or not. I think it's a critical thing. I think also important here is the rental units that are owned by Caltrans that as of now are free to be sold to the people who live there, and it's not happening. And pressure needs to be escalated upon Caltrans to sell immediately those homes to the people who currently live there and waiting for that opportunity for many years.
Thank you. Mr. Gordo.
This is one of the most important questions, I believe, facing our city. How do we stitch a city back together? One of the first things that we need to do is figure out the circulation patterns. Recall that this is not just a development issue. This is not just about how we reutilize that space. This is also a public safety issue and a traffic issue. When we reconfigure this part of our city, when we reimagine this part of our city, we have to keep in mind that Huntington Hospital one of the main access points for Huntington Hospital. And we have to ensure that we protect public safety and continue to make that hospital accessible to all parts of the city. Then we need to think about circulation and how people travel both through our city and within our city. Then we have to think about reimagining this space. And that means being thoughtful as we go through the reclaiming of this property and dealing with the state, dealing with the region, and thinking through precisely what it is that we have there. And that's going to involve and should be driven, no pun intended, by the community, by the people of this city. I'm concerned about the mandates that the state may impose as we go through the process of reclaiming this stretch of land. And we have to keep in mind that it involves two gateways. It involves a gateway to beautiful neighborhoods to the west. It involves a gateway to our historic district to the east in Old Pasadena. And so there will need to be a balance there. And the only way we'll strike that balance is if it's community driven. I was very upset when our incumbent said we should turn over some of that property to private developers. I think that's predetermining an outcome before our community weighs in and decides, and I believe that's inappropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Gordo. Mr. Madison.
Thank you. Lane, I know this is definitely a what have you done for me lately business, but before I answer the question about what we do with the stump, we killed the 710 freeway extension. And there are so many of you in this room that participated in that decades-long battle. And I think that ought not to go unrecognized. That was a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment for our community and for all of Pasadena. So now we will have this opportunity looking forward. And as was referred to, there are over 100 Caltrans homes that should be disposed of immediately. They're not really rental units as they were described. They're historic homes. And we need to get those back into the body of Pasadena through ownership and nonprofits, and some of them will be able to sell and use the proceeds to provide affordable housing. Some of them we may be able to provide affordable there. But the irony is palpable that the state is pushing us to provide more housing, and yet at the same time the state is sitting on over 100 homes right in the heart of our community. For the 50-acre stump, what a tremendous opportunity for us that lies ahead here. We have the opportunity to literally from the ground up to master plan 50 acres, and in doing so we can address a lot of the problems that we've already been talking about here tonight.
30 seconds.
My vision, though, is to return that area to the neighborhoods that it once was. If you study the history, there was a community there, a community largely of people of color, businesses, homes, and that's my vision for that as well. And I would also give some weight, although many meetings and outreach to come, but I think the Connecting Pasadena project that so many of you contributed to is a tremendous start in terms of defining the vision for that property. It's a wonderful opportunity for us.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Mr. Williams.
So what will we do with the stump? We have to start having conversations not about what we can't do. It should be more so about what we can do. I think it's very important about having the right kind of perspective in place. This is something that's been going on even before I lived here. I've only been here 9 years. But I've heard so much about this topic, walking the community, of course. One of the main things that I personally imagine is making sure that the families that were displaced during all the construction there, or the project, making sure those families are at some capacity ushered back into that environment, into that particular equation. I think it's very important when it comes to that. A lot of people were displaced with the 710 freeway, so I think that's very important. Regardless, it's going to be something that's very complex, but if you really truly think about it, it could be a very great attribute for the city. So I wouldn't support private developers coming in and building. I really think that we should put the pressure on Caltrans to make sure that they turn those houses back over to programs that we have here in the city, so that homeowners and renters can take full advantage of that. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek?
So there's obvious consensus that reconnecting that ditch to the fabric of the city is one of the great opportunities for the future of the city. I think that this is a legacy, what I would describe as a legacy project. This is something that will take, to complete, will take 20 or 25 years. It's a project that our children and our grandchildren will enjoy. And frankly, having an opportunity to participate in launching that process is one of the reasons I decided to run for re-election. I think it's that important. I, with many of you, was in this room when that sort of citizen-driven planning process was getting excited about the opportunities that might exist. And I commend to you the article. I've read the article in the WPRA newsletter by Steve, authored by Steve, that really summarizes all you really need to know right now about this project and its future. So I think it's a terrific summary. What I do believe is that it's going to take very careful managing of Caltrans to achieve the relinquishment, which is the official word that we need to use in terms of getting this real estate under the city's control without having to pay for it. That's a process that's going to require very careful management from an agency that historically has not been very cooperative, but is showing at least some evidence of cooperation now. Thank you. I think that the circulation issues will have to be resolved, and then there's an endless number of planning and development issues that will be the result of probably one of the most thorough public planning processes that we have seen in recent history. But it's something that I very much look forward to having an opportunity to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
So, as everyone said, the 710 stub is a very exciting urban planning opportunity for the city. None of us on this dais are experts in urban planning, as much as we pretend to be know-it-alls about all kinds of things, and we're going to need to involve urban planning experts that listen to the concerns, the interests, the dreams of the residents of Pasadena, and then translate them into feasible options, which then have more public review and revision and acceptance. So it definitely needs to be a process of transparency and inclusiveness of the whole community. As we're thinking about what we want to accomplish there, we want to make sure that we include public spaces that are available to all, that mitigate the feeling that some have in our city that it's a tale of two cities. We want to be easing congestion. We want to make sure whatever we do doesn't increase it. We want to make sure that what we do is consistent with the existing neighborhoods and the beauty of Pasadena. And we want to make room for green space and it needs to be financially feasible. It's a heavy lift there. We need to definitely be working with Caltrans over the next 4 years. They're going to be figuring out how the transportation in terms of the highways is going to work. We need to be very active with them, because then that will impact what we can do when they deed it back to us. We haven't had a really good history of working with Caltrans. When I walk door to door on those streets of the houses that are owned by Caltrans, I heard an earful about what a horrible landlord they are, and how slow it is they are getting those houses back to residents, and not a word about the city being involved in helping with that. An individual resident should not have to be battling with Caltrans. The city should be stepping in there and really being an advocate for our residents there.
Thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Hardin.
Thank you. From those that remember my last campaign for office, I was absolutely against the 710, so I would like to commend Senator Portantino and all of the organizations involved that helped kill the 710 possibility. But I think before we get too comfortable with planning what we're going to do with the stub, we should pay attention to Senate Bill 29 and really get the 710 extension off the highway, off the state highway and streets codes, because we don't want this issue to be revisited, or else we'll be just where we was 5 years ago down the line. And we don't want the possibility and the conversation to ever come up to actually bring the tunnel into existence. So to prevent that, we do have to support SB 29. We do have to make sure that this is never looked at again. And then I believe that we can start putting more brain matter onto how we want to use that land. And to do that, I think we need a lot of community input. And I'm not just talking about West Pasadena community input. I'm talking all the way to the east side, northwest, and whatnot. And we have to create a buy-in. We want people's input because it does benefit all of us, and if it's something that we all can use, all can benefit from, all can gain from, then it's going to help everybody. And so I do think we have to have more input from those that aren't usually in this conversation. Like I said, Northwest and the East Side, because like I said, it is an opportunity. It's a great opportunity. I'd like to see a nice neighborhood there. I might like to see some mixed developments there, so we can have maybe some shops or maybe even a beautiful park. So it's a great opportunity to let our imagination kind of run wild, but like I said, before we can do
30
that,
seconds.
we do have to make sure this isn't revisited again and that the 710 is dead forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Next question we'll start with Mr. Gordo.
The city recently hired architects to design suicide prevention barriers for the Colorado Street Bridge and presented several designs. What do you think about the proposed barriers, and do you think there could be alternatives?
What was the end of that question?
Last part. Could there be alternatives to the barriers?
Let me first start by saying that initially the question is, should we have barriers? Are people just going to find another way to regrettably harm themselves and kill themselves? And that was an important threshold question for me. We should always do everything that we can to prevent that. And that includes better mental health programs. That includes forcing the County of Los Angeles to do its part in terms of providing mental health services here in the city of Pasadena. I don't think the county is serving us well, and I think we ought to change that. So the question that was posed is, should we alter the bridge? And I learned something. I learned that there are different types of suicides. One is an impulse suicide, and that's what the experts tell us is occurring at the Colorado Street Bridge. People who get to know a certain place as a place for them to take their own lives. And I think we have a responsibility, given that fact, that there are impulse suicides, to put in a barrier. I think we should look at all of the alternatives. I look forward to the alternatives coming forward to the City Council. And I look forward to hearing the input, not just from the people who live in and around
30 seconds.
the bridge, but from the input from people throughout the city. And importantly, I look forward to hearing the input of the mental health experts and other experts who are every day working to avoid people from, or prevent people from harming themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Gordo. Mr. Madison.
So I supported the city manager's decision to put temporary barriers up, and I think the entire council did, because we could have obviously directed him to not do that or to take them down. I mean, this is a tragic problem, even beyond the number of lives that are lost there. And we have a new community right below the bridge to the east in the Habitat for Humanity homes and a playground there, and we have the Arroyo Vista project there, and those members, those constituents of our district are subjected to the trauma, if you will, of those suicides and attempted suicides. Our public safety personnel are too. I mean, we get a report every day on the council about noteworthy police activity or fire activity, and when there is someone who has jumped or is often even a longer problem of threatening to jump, and they're out there for 6, 8, 10 hours, it really tears at the morale and the fiber of everything we stand for in Pasadena, and ultimately the bridge becomes known as, you know, that terrible nickname that we all know. So I do support some solution. We have a consultant studying it now, and it's coming back to the Public Safety Committee, on which I sit, in February, and we will have, I promise you, a lot of public meetings, both at the committee and then ultimately at the council level. But I certainly think we reached a point when the fence was installed that we had to elevate the immediate threat to human safety and well-being over the temporary appearance diminution on the bridge. I'm confident we can come up with a solution that meets all of those objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Mr. Williams?
Yes, well, I've gone on record supporting the council's initial decision to put up the temporary barriers. In all honesty, I support whatever is there now. Looking at the history of the actual bridge and beyond conversations and looking at the data and statistics, if I'm correct, I believe there was 106 deaths over 100 years. If you are going to be pulling resources away from the city and taxpayers, I just think people are the most priority in regards to our homeless community and our affordable housing issue. And so if we're going back and forth for a certain amount of time creating these task force or working with these task force, we're actually paying for those task force to come up with these ideals and these plans. My ideal is not to come up with a solution at all. Yes, I am for coming up with a solution, but I just think more pressing issues as far as resources and funds should solely be focused on homelessness and affordable housing here locally in the city. I went to the bridge and I visited the bridge and I seen the specs of it. One thing that we can't do as human beings, as a mayor, as a city council member, we can't be predictive police. We can't control human nature. They're going to be able to do those type of things if they truly want to do it. And so my only pause is to make it that actual priority, is to say that, if those funds are available, those funds should be directed to the crisis that we all say that's our number one issue, which is homelessness and affordable housing in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek?
So I don't think that we can tolerate having our iconic Colorado Street Bridge being identified as the sort of go-to location for suicide in the region, which is what was happening when that temporary fencing went up. It's not a tolerable condition. You'd be amazed the number of people that sort of took the position, well, people are going to jump anyway, so it's not our responsibility to deal with it. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that the emergency fencing was appropriate. I supported it. I urged it. I think further that we have to recognize that suicide is a national epidemic. And so the likelihood when you have a location that's identified in social media as a place to do this and puts it in people's minds that you've got to intervene in that process. I think I've attended some of the workshops and seen the work product to date because I'm so interested in this. I think that the Department of Public Works has been laboring along. They had an initial screening process to come up with various categories of barriers, and have concluded that a physical barrier, a fence of some kind, is the most appropriate way, and they considered all the alternatives, and that was a citizen task force activity. But I think what we have to be honest and recognize that no matter what physical barrier is installed, and we will install a physical barrier, and I hope sooner rather than later, that it's not going to be an aesthetically pleasing item as compared to the way the bridge looked before the fence.
30 seconds.
And so I think we have to reconcile ourselves to that reality and put the premium on preventing the loss of life, and recognize that aesthetically we're going to have to take a step back, and the purpose of this elaborate process is to find the minimal solution that will do the job. I support that.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
So I too was taken aback the first time I saw the fencing on the beautiful bridge, but I have learned, and as others have talked about, that more than 50%, some say, of suicides are spontaneous. I think I thought before that people planned it out and had a plan and went to do it, and that's not the case. And so even any types of barriers, so the footholds are too small to climb, and that type of barrier is enough to turn someone back from their spontaneous decision to do something like that. One child, one parent, one sibling that is saved from doing that is worth those efforts. I'm glad that we are working with the expert in the world, as I understand, on creating a barrier that will work. It's, as has been mentioned, we're in, there's increasing depression, there's increasing suicide. The CDC reports that 1 in 6 high school students have considered suicide. These are important mental health issues. So also, as we look at what we're going to do with the bridge to make it as safe as possible and to deter as many suicides as possible, we need to look at our comprehensive mental health services and what the county is going to be providing. We need to have a real collaboration with the county and have a relationship with our supervisors that is good and working together, because they have a lot more money than we do, and they have a lot of control over money that relates to mental health. So we want to be thinking about those things as well. That
30
also,
seconds.
I'm sorry.
30 seconds.
Okay. And that also goes, that mental health service also goes to what we're going to do with the chronically homeless. Those issues really have to do with mental health. We shut down our mental hospitals decades ago, and we've been hiding that population in the jails, and we need to come up with supportive housing for those folks. So a lot to do with mental health that we need to be thinking about.
Thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Hardin?
Thank you. I do believe that there's a serious issue with the suicide rate at the actual Colorado Street Bridge, but I'm absolutely against the structural changes. I am against the temporary barriers, because I think we shouldn't just try to change where they jump, we should try to change their minds. And to do that, I think we can kind of take an artistic approach. We do have some geniuses in our city when it comes to art and communication, so I believe that we should take an artistic approach and actually try to add some signage, some artwork, some murals, some way to share and communicate stories of other people that have lost their lives, and something, make it sentimental, you know what I'm saying? Maybe even kind of change it into a memorial bridge. We want people to change their minds. We want people, if they go up there and there's nobody there to stop them, they can read something, they can see a sign, they can call somebody, because there's a lot of inspirational stuff on that bridge that can kind of deter them from even thinking about jumping. Because like I said, if we just change the structure of it, they're going to jump off another bridge. It's possible. It happens in Pasadena. Colorado Street Bridge isn't the only bridge people jump off of in the city of Pasadena. So we do have to address the actual changing of their minds instead of just where they jump, because like I said, we do have a beautiful bridge, we do have a beautiful landscape, and we don't want to take away from that. And I get that if we do anything that can actually prevent jumping off the suicide bridge in a structural way, then it's really just a canopy all the way down, and I think that's too expensive. We have to maintain that.
30 seconds.
And I don't think that's going to be feasible for very long, especially with the way our economy is going, the way our budget is set up. We're going to be coming up short in the near future, so that's just going to be another expense. But what we can do is a one-time redecoration of the bridge, something that enhances its beauty and something that pays tribute to all the lives that have been lost on that bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Bell?
So you heard it here first. We are all against suicide. We're unanimous on that. I think it's what's been said is very true, that suicide is a tragedy in our society. It's on the rise. I work as a humanist chaplain. In addition to other work I do, I'm a humanist chaplain at USC. And we had perhaps the worst semester we've had in decades. We lost over 9 students. I think we lost at least 9 students last semester, not all of them to suicide. But it's an epidemic, and there's also such a thing as a suicide contagion. And I think, I'm not an expert on this clearly, but the bridge represents a kind of contagion where people go there because other people have gone there. You don't see people jumping from the La Loma Bridge with anywhere near the frequency as the Colorado Street Bridge. It is definitely the most iconic image of our city. If you wanted to, have a picture in your home that represents Pasadena, it would either be City Hall or the bridge, probably the bridge. But there's more than one way to destroy an icon. It could be uglier than it was before, but it could also be known by a very unfortunate name. And I think, as has been said already by so many, I would much rather
30 seconds.
affect the visual image of the bridge than for it to be known nationwide as a place where people commit suicide. And so I think, like others have said, we should do our best to make it as attractive as possible and as commensurate to the architecture that's there, but we absolutely need to do everything we can and address the other issues that are all interlocking with this issue, the sense of despair that people have in this economy and in our community, and to address the larger issues that cause people to want to end their lives in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Our next question will be directed first to Mr. Madison.
Under our city's master plan, the lower Arroyo Seco is supposed to remain a more natural area as opposed to the central Arroyo. What is your vision for the lower Arroyo?
So I can repeat the question. The question was, in the city's master plan, the lower Arroyo is intended to be open space, unencumbered, and what is my position, our position on the lower Arroyo Seco? So obviously the lower Arroyo Seco is extremely important to all of Pasadena, and especially to those of us in West Pasadena who live so nearby. And I'm proud of the work that we've done there in terms of creating and preserving open space and passive recreation. We have the casting club, which I'm proud of, and I would count that as passive. We have walking trails that many of us use. We were able to preserve and rebuild the John Van de Kamp Bridge at significant cost and rename it the John Van de Kamp Bridge, certainly an icon here at WPRA. Regrettably, we were not able to accomplish what we wanted when it came to things like the archery use in the lower Arroyo. That was one of those occasions where I said over my dead body, and my colleagues said that can be arranged, Steve. And they re-upped an agreement with the archers for, I believe, too large use in terms of the footprint, and not enough appropriate regulation of the inherently dangerous use that modern bows and arrows involves. These aren't the bows and arrows that we bought at the dime store when we were kids. These are high-tech potential weapons, and I'm sorry to report that we've now had some new incidents of arrows on roofs and in yards along South San Rafael, and that is gravely concerning to us. So the city's record hasn't been perfect, but we're going to continue to be a very strong advocate for the lower Arroyo. One of the things I've been talking about in the campaign is organizing one or more cleanup days. I think we could mobilize a lot of community participation and combine that with some city resources, which we've already been doing at the north end of the lower Arroyo. You may have noticed, to really re-energize and clean up while preserving. I'm also very proud of the work that my mentor, Bill Bogart, and dear friend Doug Cranwinkle are doing at One Arroyo, and intend to support that work as well.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Mr. Williams?
Yes, I support open spaces throughout the city. I have 3 sons, and me and my wife are very active when we kick them out of the house. We send them to one of the local parks or over to the Arroyo. I think it's very important to preserve those spaces, and I think the council has done the best job they possibly could have. I would have liked to see the archery stay there as well. I think that we could actually have more open spaces when it comes to Pasadena. But in regards to just there, I mean, the preservation of it is one of those things where, once more, as I said earlier, when it comes to evolution, everything evolves, and sometimes the landscape has to change as well. But what they've done to it thus far, I just would support. There's not much to say in regards to what I would do to it, because wherever it is at this point right now, I'm pretty comfortable with it. I would look forward to any ambitious plans that come up in the future in regards to what we could do to it, whether it's adding or subtracting. But I am for nature. I am for open spaces. 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek?
I've described the Arroyo Seco as the green beating heart of Pasadena. I mean, I think that as a resource, it's hard to imagine a more wonderful thing to be in an urban area. And part of what makes it so magical is the fact that we have this whole array of uses. You name it, active recreation or passive recreation, it's happening in the Arroyo Seco, and that's one of the challenges. People view the Arroyo through the prism of how they use it, whether they're Rose Bowl game attendees or Frisbee golfers or horseback riders or swimmers, it's all there. I think the question is very nuanced and is a really good question. And Steve referenced the sort of tug of war that happens over enjoying open space is great, but how do you enjoy it? I mean, how do you achieve the balance between passive and active recreation? And I think the Lower Arroyo is one of those areas that has reflected that, the dog walkers versus the archers and all the other things that people in the neighborhood are well aware of. One of the ways to respond to that is to continue the work that the Army Corps of Engineers has been doing in terms of a habitat restoration analysis that's been going on for a couple of years, and given the speed of the Corps of Engineers will be going on for a couple of more years.
30 seconds.
To determine whether or not it's possible to eliminate some or all of the drainage channel, the concrete drainage channel that I really think is a scar on the face of the Arroyo. So I think we have some very bright times ahead in terms of analysis and working through these nuanced uses of what the Arroyo Seco means to Pasadena.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
So I predict we're all going to be in violent agreement that we support open space and we support the Lower Arroyo continuing to be open space. I love the idea and looking into getting rid of the cement part of it. And I love what One Arroyo is doing. And I think just because they give us 2 minutes doesn't mean we have to take all of it. I think we all think those are good things and something that I would support.
Well, thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Hardin?
To be honest, if elected, there's so many things I want to change in this city, but the Lower Arroyo isn't one of them. I really like it just the way it is. And since the last election, I've actually had the opportunity to hike all through the Arroyo. I'm talking about all the way from the waterfall, past JPL, all the way down. And it was like a 14-mile hike, and I didn't know it was going to be that long, and it was in the middle of the rain season. But one thing, like hiking in the rain, during the rain season, it was just an amazing experience. It's just an adventure, and it's like I was a kid again. And especially like discovering the archery range for the first time and the casting pond and wondering what the casting pond was for a few minutes before somebody had to tell me what that was. And then still like a casting pond where you just, but I'm just saying it's a beautiful place. And I think if we overdevelop or we commercialize it in any way, we'll definitely be taken from the integrity of the city. And so I'm against parking lots down there. I'm against any commercial developments down there. And I think that we should focus on maintenance and preservation, seriously. And I think that's how we should approach the Lower Arroyo as a city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Bell?
It's a beautiful treasure. I'm very fortunate to be able to walk without having to drive anywhere to go to the trails. And just a few days ago was walking there, often do that just to clear my head. And it's amazing how quickly you can forget that you live in a relatively large city. Saw a bobcat, in fact. I saw people staring into the trees, and I thought, they're either in a trance or they've seen something. And they had seen a bobcat, and it was amazing. I had never seen a bobcat in the wild. And my first bobcat, I've lived in the mountains, and so it's a beautiful natural habitat. I absolutely think that if we can get rid of the concrete aqueduct, the viaduct piece of it, we should do that. I've been a part of the Friends of the Los Angeles River for a long time, and think that it also is very unattractive as a result of the concrete, and we can do better than that. And I think trail restoration is important, being able to keep people safe while they're out there hiking, walking, and just really, I'm just in favor of everything that's been said, to keep it natural, to not commercialize it, to not add too many human-made items to it. I will say that, after we've seen some of these ravaging fires in other parts of California, that the communities that live adjacent to the arroyo are at some additional risk of fire danger, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can as well while we keep it as natural as possible, to make sure that we're protecting that neighborhood from the risk of fire.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gordo, to finish up.
So I agree that the arroyo, it makes us very unique. I mean, think about the arroyo and think about the open space. As a kid, after I delivered the Pasadena Star-News every day before school, but on weekends, I would go and visit Eaton Canyon because it was closest to my house, and that is a terrific space. But the arroyo is so unique. And it allowed me to imagine Pasadena. It allowed me being in the open space, and it allowed me to connect with open space. And the arroyo is just that, and we need to allow other kids to enjoy it, to experience it, and to recognize how special it is from the very top of the arroyo to the bottom of the arroyo. And I believe the key to that is maintenance as well as restoration. I think we don't do as good a job as we should in the lower arroyo or any part of the arroyo in terms of maintenance or restoration. It's also an opportunity, and to address the question specifically on the lower arroyo, we should keep it as natural as we can and focus on restoration, but not just limit that restoration and maintenance to the lower arroyo. It should be across the entire arroyo. Remove as much concrete as we can, engage in wall and trail restoration, and engage different demographics. The Flint Ridge Foundation has a job training program where they train kids in pre-apprentice to then become craftsmen or become involved in the trades. And I believe we should work with the Flint Ridge Foundation to create a maintenance and restoration team of Pasadenans, young people, who would be focused on restoring the arroyo year-round, doing the fire prevention, restoring trails, restoring walls, and doing all of the things that young people, I think, are interested in, including experiencing the arroyo, and make it also a jobs program at the same time.
It's time for our next question. This one will start with Mr. Williams.
This is a question inspired by the Madison Heights Neighborhood Association, and it's about transportation. How would you ensure a realistic balance of transportation options that would allow everybody, including the elderly and families with children, to access all that Pasadena has to offer? And how do you propose to evaluate and incorporate the effects of development on our transportation systems in our city?
Thank you. That's a great question. First, we will have to start from a foundational standpoint of reimagining how we actually move around the city. We've already experienced the failure of the bike, the public bikes. And so I think we have to have more inclusionary when it comes to the actual public giving input. One thing that I want to get past moving forward is to make sure that we have more inclusion. We have a tendency as leaders, as public officials, not myself, just speaking for the others, is that we quickly jump to the so-called professionals. And from my experience of collaborations and working with so many different groups and in different industries, the people here in the actual community are my version of what professionals are, because ultimately we are here to govern based upon the voices that you lend us. So I think it's about us collectively coming together and mapping things out together. One bold and crazy idea that I actually wanted to implement is something that's kind of like a walkway system, which you see at the airport. So when you're talking about elderly, it's something that's bold, it's kind of out the box. I want to create a walkway system versus if you like at the airport, when you're traveling and you're walking to your gate, they have a walkway system. I want to implement something like that. That can reduce and get people out of their cars. It takes them, if they're not bike riders, now they have opportunity to create a different version of transportation. So that's something that I would advocate for, and that's something I'm actually working with some developers and tech guys currently right now, so we can actually show models when I'm doing different town halls,
30 seconds.
Town halls over the next couple of weeks. So we can kind of see if that's even a possibility. But mind you, even coming up with an idea like that, maybe it's not the best idea, but because I'm presenting it in that fashion, maybe someone locally here in the community comes up with a better idea. And me, I'm a collaborator. I would champion for that. And I would be just as excited as long as it's something that contributes to bettering our transportation here in the city for our seniors, for our bike riders, and just for the actual economy, I mean the environment as well, as far as fuels and emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek.
Thank you. So the general plan, which a lot of the people in this room spent years working on, has developed an idea that says that people in Pasadena should be able to circulate without an automobile. That's an aspirational goal. And it's been somehow morphed into a declaration that City Hall is anti-automobile and is determined to kill the car. That's not what the general plan says. The general plan says that we want to be able to offer options to people who can't afford cars, people who are too young or too old to drive cars, to be able to get around. And so we've been enhancing our transit system, Pasadena Transit, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary. We are trying to develop a more sensible system of bicycle trails and paths around the city, and we're trying to make the pedestrian experience viable wherever and safe wherever we can. I support all of those things. It's not to be understood as being an anti-car person, because most of us in this room will continue to make most of our trips in an automobile. So we need to be realistic about how we achieve this kind of thing. And it was so interesting. The other night we spent a couple of hours in Pasadena at a city council meeting with a raging debate over VMT versus LOS. VMT is vehicle miles traveled, LOS is level of service,
30
and
seconds.
how we measure impacts of development on transportation. There are very few cities, I think, on the planet where you would see citizens engaged in a debate over VMT over LOS, and I think that's a healthy thing, and I think it's the kind of discussion that we will have here that will lead to better results and a better understanding of what's realistic for us in Pasadena.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
So mobility is a really important issue for us in the city. Nobody wants to be the congested nightmare that is the West Side. People are worried that we're moving in that direction, and we need to be really thoughtful about that. We need to stop doing wishful thinking about mass transit. I call it the field of dreams planning. If we build it, they will take mass transit. No, they're not. And so we need to be really realistic about that until we create real incentives to get people out of their car that actually get them out of their car. We cannot do public planning that assumes people are going to get out of their cars. We need to be, there was an article in the Star News recently about how in 2014 we stopped judging developments based on the impacts on traffic, or we changed the thresholds about which we looked at the impact on traffic. We need to look at the impact on traffic when we're thinking about development. We have, when the 710 was killed, then there was about $500 million of money that will be rerouted to mobility issues. So we need to be really active with thinking about what's going to happen with that money to make it easier to move around our city. One of the things that's coming out of that is a likely underground or overground of the Gold Line at California. That seems like it would be a good development, although in the short term probably a big mess, but overall
30 seconds.
Something that most people say we should have done in any event. We need to use technology to get our lights better coordinated, and in the future we'll probably be using technology to map our routes routes where we go, not just ways, but as an overall routing people throughout the city. We do need to think of developing communities and how people walk between them. And when we think about senior planning, especially in that southern Fair Oaks area, where there can be really attractive senior living that's close to health services and close to vibrant Old Town. That all needs to be part of our planning as well.
Thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Hardin?
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying that I'm a strong supporter and avid user of public transportation. I do have a tap card in my wallet right now with money on it, so I do ride quite frequently. And I've been supportive of the Pasadena transit system ever since it was the area rapid transit system, when it was called the Arts Bus, and nobody knew what the Arts Bus was. And I used to think it was just a bus that takes the students to the art school, you know. And and I've been riding it since it was free. It was a free shuttle when I was in high school. And I'm actually very proud that it's only 75 cents to this day. And I was in high school 21 years ago. I hate saying that, but I guess I can up here. But anyway, I think I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't want to get distracted. But what I'm saying is I do appreciate the Pasadena Transit. I do appreciate their efforts, and I think we should all support them. I do think they can enhance their routes to make them all as efficient as the Route 20, because a lot of people, like most of the riders, ride the Route 20, and the other routes don't really connect to the points that like they should. And I think we should incentivize ride sharing, because like many people up here said, we do have to get people out their cars. We do have to kind of eliminate the greenhouse gas emissions, and the big contributor to that is on-road transportation. So we got to alleviate that by really promoting public transportation, really promoting ride sharing, really incentivizing carpooling and whatnot. And in Monrovia, they have a Lyft app code called Go Monrovia, and if you're using Lyft within Monrovia, it's $1 to get anywhere inside Monrovia. And I think if we utilize something like that in Pasadena, we can alleviate traffic. We can alleviate a lot of the congestion due to the games that we have and the events that we have in our Rose Bowl. So there's a lot of things that we can do, but we do have to be supportive as a community. If we're going to add lines to the Pasadena Transit and enhance those, we have to use those. You know what I'm saying? We have to take advantage of them. We can't just want more things and then not utilize them and wonder why these services disappear. So I would encourage everybody to utilize the Pasadena Transit, to utilize the GO line, and to utilize ride sharing and whatnot, because like I said, those things help do more than just alleviate traffic and make our environment better. So I think those are a lot of the approaches that we should take, and we should be very supportive of our public transportation system.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Bell?
So we live in a transitional time, I feel like, in Pasadena, where I think a lot of us have the idea of a small town, and we're actually a fairly good-sized city. We have Pete Buttigieg running for the Democratic nomination, and his city is 2/3 the size of our city. He's administered a much smaller city than even Pasadena. And so I think we're in this transition, this painful transition, trying to figure out how do we get more people out of their cars into public transportation without being sort of totalitarian about it, right? So, you know, obviously, as Mayor Tornek has said, we're not going to suddenly not have anybody driving their cars. I have a car. I don't like driving. I would much rather not have to drive. And my favorite city experiences, if I think back of all the cities I've traveled to, my favorite city experiences have been the ones where I didn't need a car to get around. New York City, for example, or Paris, or London, where I was able to walk and take public transportation everywhere I needed to go. There are cities like Boston where you dare not rent a car to drive because you will get lost and not know where you are. So I think we need to do everything we can to make public transportation more pleasant, more attractive, make it free, make it more frequent, have it go more places so that it's a realistic choice, so that you're not standing waiting for 25 minutes for the next bus to come along, but you can realistically take the bus where you need to go. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out to the Complete Streets Coalition. There's a group of really creative people working really hard on these exact issues, and we need to tap into their knowledge base. And I think this is especially an area where we need not say what we can't do. We need to be thinking about what we can do. And too often this conversation devolves into, well, we couldn't do that and we can't do that. Oh, well, I guess we all just have to drive our cars one at a time everywhere we go. And we need to have a positive, forward-looking, I think, creativity on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gordo.
So, you know, this is one of those areas that's also interwoven with local control. I think what we've realized and come to understand is that you can't separate development from traffic, and traffic is one of the most important and pressing issues facing this city today. We started with 105,000 people coming to visit Pasadena every day. 55,000 or so people leaving the city every day. And so when you think about traffic, start with that baseline. And then think about the development that's occurred. And importantly, and the question was about measurement of impacts, we aren't measuring the impacts of individual projects and the effect on traffic to the local neighborhoods and to block by block to the local businesses. And I think we need to get back to that. We need to understand, not just for traffic purposes, but for sustainability purposes, also for infrastructure purposes, what the impacts of development are, and we need to mitigate for that. One of the reasons that we went away from measuring the impacts of individual development is the state said, you know, you're not going to be able to do it. And we should be saying to the state, we can do it and we should do it. The staff for the longest time told us, the city staff told us that we couldn't measure the impacts of development as part of CEQA, but we can measure it outside of CEQA and understand the impact so we can mitigate for that traffic. You've heard me vote no on a number of projects because we're not measuring not only the impact of individual projects to traffic, but we're also not measuring the cumulative impacts of all of these projects, and it's having a tremendous impact on traffic and our ability to move through the city. We also need to make our local transit more reliable and coordinate with the region, because our local traffic should move us around the city, and we should connect with the region to move us outside of the city.
Mr. Madison.
Thank you. So traffic and transportation and parking occupy a great deal of attention for us at the City Council. We recently hired a new transportation director, Fred Dhaka, whom many of you remember, retired, and we hired Laura Cornejo over from LA Metro, what we used to call the MTA. We think that's an appropriate hire. She'll be able to help us with some of this funding that will be coming in lieu of the 710 extension. We'll have hundreds of millions of dollars available for local projects like putting the Gold Line either above or below grade at California and a number of other projects. I think, you know, the solutions here range from the profound to the mundane. We have worked hard to address local intersections. So for example, you've probably noticed at Orange Grove in Colorado, there is a left turn light now where for years there wasn't, and we've worked very hard on that. We are currently installing or implementing a plan to install an additional right turn lane at California and Pasadena Avenue by the Vons there. I'm sure many of you have been frustrated with the pace of traffic there. We're also working on Holly and Orange Grove just past the 210 freeway. You can wait quite a long time there too. In terms of the big picture, you know, we are going to be forced by climate change, by state and federal regulations to be smarter in terms of our transportation solutions. I sit with the mayor and Ross Selvage on the Burbank Bob Hope, what used to be called Bob Hope Airport Board, and we're certainly very interested in solutions like bringing the Gold Line west from Pasadena to the airport. We think that would be a strong improvement, and I've proposed that we actually no longer charge a fee for the Pasadena local transit buses, what we used to call the arts buses. We charge 75 cents a ride, but I've read that some cities are moving to free rides within their local transit, and I think we could afford to do that, and it would be an important message to promote public transportation. Thank you.
Our next, as we prepare for our next question, this is the point at which, after this question, we'll have a chance for you to ask questions. If you have a question, you're thinking about a question, you might want to begin to think about heading over towards the microphone where you will have a chance to ask your question after this question round. So for this last question round here, we'll start with Mr. Tornek.
Pasadena prides itself on citizen involvement, the Pasadena way. Yet many residents complain of recent examples when the city or council ignored the desires or recommendations of citizen groups. For one example, following months of community input on Desiderio Park, the final project looks different from what West Pasadenans said they wanted. Why should citizens get involved if their recommendations will be ignored?
Pasadena has a tremendous record of soliciting citizen opinion and being responsive to it. I think that what's happened today is that when a particular group of citizens take a strong point of view, particularly in the later stage of project development, if they haven't been engaged in the process earlier on, and the council doesn't agree with them, if they disagree with the outcome, they fault the process. I think for the most part the process is very sound. I think it would be hard to imagine a city that solicits more citizen participation, input, creative thinking than Pasadena does, and I think that's true across the board. It's not perfect, and sometimes I'm disappointed that people don't turn out in the early stages of planning and only show up at the very end when some commitments have been made. But I think it's not fair to say that if the city ultimately makes a decision contrary to what a particular group may articulate, that it's not listening. It's just disagreeing. The Desiderio Park example was a feeling that in terms of city policy and city outcomes, that to have a public park with a playground, without a restroom, was not sound policy, and most of the council members agreed. The fact that immediate neighbors disagreed with that outcome was not that they weren't listened to, the council simply didn't agree with that particular point of view. So I would defend the city's process in terms of soliciting citizen opinion. I think it's just, we need to recognize that we will not always agree on issues, but citizens are always heard. The outcome may just not be to their satisfaction in some instances.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
So I do think it's really important that we have citizen input and involvement in all of this. I think people are looking for more transparency. They're looking for more honesty about the various positions, what's going into it, why different decisions were made. I've heard that a lot going door to door. You can't always do everything that people want, but at a minimum, people need a response when they call about a concern, and they need an honest answer about what can or cannot be done. We all need to, I think, especially in this really polarized time, to listen, to be respectful, to understand that there are diverse interests, and to make the compromises that we can. And we need to model that as citizens, we need to model that as city council people, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Hardin?
Thank you. When it comes to the Pasadena way, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I'm from Northwest Pasadena, and when I think of the Pasadena way, I think of the stone slab in front of the police department. So I associate the Pasadena way with the Pasadena Police Department. And if it's up to me, I will change the Pasadena way. I'm not going to lie to you. Because like I said, we have a very different idea of what happens to citizens by the Pasadena Police Department in my neighborhood. And I do agree with Mr. Mayor Tornek in regards that we do not show up at early as we can to nip some things in the bud and to be a part of the decision-making process. And that's why I'm running for mayor, because I do know that we are underrepresented, and that it is part of our problem and part of our fault that we are underrepresented in my community, because we don't show up through the whole process. And I wanted to get folks in my neighborhood and in my community interested in local government, interested in decision-making processes of our city, interested in the voting, interested in the community meetings, the work groups, and all the commissions and all the opportunities to make your voice voice heard before the tragedies happened, because I admire a lot of you and how you guys pack the city council meetings for every single issue that's important to you. I do not like the fact that we pack the city council meetings after 3 black people were shot in a close amount of time. It's just sad, you know? So I do believe that through just being involved myself, I can lead by example and show the people that we can make a difference. Our voices are heard, but we got to speak up before things are happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Bell?
One of the things that I love about the scale of Pasadena, the size of our city, is that it does allow for a lot of community involvement. The fact that we can be here right now, and I don't know, I'm a terrible judge of audience size, but there's what, a couple hundred people here, 150 maybe? It's awesome. I love it. And on a weeknight when we've all got to get up early and go to work. So I think that the Pasadena Way is inspiring to me, and it's most aspirational, which is lots of people involved. And I agree with what the mayor is saying, that for years I was a pastor. I've always been involved in community organizations. I've been in nonprofit work my entire life. My whole professional life has been about trying to build consensus out of disparate ideas. You know, you've heard of the proverbial church carpet, right, where churches have split over a disagreement about what color the carpet should be. And, you know, this is the negative side, right, of lots of people being involved in decision making, but I still think it's worth it. What I would say about the Pasadena Way, however, as I've listened to people across the city, is that it doesn't represent, and I think Mr. Hardin was touching on this, that it doesn't represent our whole city. And I think what I've also observed is that civic engagement tends to favor those who have time to do it, who have 2-parent households, who don't have kids at home and can afford to be in city council until 1 in the morning. So I think we need to do better at making sure that we not only wait for people to come to us to express their concerns, but to be in the community, hearing people's concerns, and then representing those concerns to the decision-making bodies.
30 seconds.
And to make sure that we're setting up opportunities to have listening sessions in Northwest Pasadena, on the eastern side of Pasadena, where people that aren't currently at the table answering questions about the Lower Arroyo, who probably, you know, many people have never even had the opportunity to visit the Lower Arroyo, to make sure that they're engaged in the Pasadena Way as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gordo?
You know, you elect us to exercise sound judgment when you can't be there. And exercising sound judgment, in my view, means listening carefully. You know, public participation does not end with workshops. You know, public hearings at City Council are important. And so when we start to hear at the public hearings that maybe the plan is wrong, that maybe we're representing a plan and not representing people, we have a responsibility to listen. And we have a responsibility to think, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe the plan is wrong. I supported Mr. Madison's motion to revisit Desiderio. Why? Because people were telling us that maybe we can improve this plan. Maybe we could still accomplish the goal and revisit what we were doing. Maybe the plan wasn't as good as it could be, and maybe we got it wrong. There was an unwillingness to do that, and I think that's wrong, because that's why you elect us. You know, how many people can make these workshops? Not very many. Mr. Bell is absolutely correct. Sometimes people don't start paying attention, or maybe it wasn't brought to their attention until it becomes a public hearing at City Council. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. And so I think it was a mistake to not take a step back and build confidence in our community that we got it right. And if we ultimately, or got it wrong, and if we ultimately maintained the same position, then we had a responsibility to explain it. I think what people reacted to in that project is we weren't willing to take a step back. We weren't willing to listen and maybe explore the possibility that that plan could be better. And as your mayor, I plan to do that and then take consensus, or I'm sorry, build consensus if in fact we got it wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Gordo. Mr. Madison?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'm a strong believer in the citizen commissions that we have in Pasadena. I think we have 27 that I and each of the council members and the mayor have appointments to, and I take those appointments very seriously, and I take the work that the commissions do very seriously. It's some of the commissions are wield significant legal authority in terms of property rights and other important issues, planning, for example, or design review. Others are more advisory to the city council in terms of where we should be headed in terms of our overall policies. What I tell my appointees when I appoint them is you have great judgment, you're intelligent, I just need you to participate fully, and I'll never tell you how to vote. I might agree or disagree at times in particular cases, and I'm always available to talk if you want to talk about issues, but I've never once told a commissioner how to vote, for example. You want people with great judgment to serve, and it's a real gift. Of course, they have to really do the job. They have to participate, and respect at the end of the day means keeping your promise to do the job that you signed on to do. Desiderio is a very sore subject for this particular council member because it's almost completely an unbridled success story. We were able to reacquire from the federal government, working with two separate federal agencies, the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, reacquire the property. We were able to site those 9 single-family ownership homes that I mentioned to you, create a new community of over 40 people, 29 of whom are school-age kids who will go to our public schools. It's affordable housing. Have a beautiful playground and open space repatriated to the Arroyo. And then one of my colleagues proposed that we build $1 million bathroom there. And it was terrible public policy, terrible idea, but she had the votes and I didn't, but we haven't heard the last of that yet. I'm going to continue to work on that issue for the neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Madison.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams?
So the question is, why should citizens get involved in also addressing the Pasadena way? I think it's very important that the citizens are involved, but I also think it's more important that the leaders of the city are actually proactive in soliciting that. There was a couple of times that I personally have went to the city council meeting, and the way that I found out that it was closed is because of a piece of paper that was actually on the board. And I don't know if anyone else has actually experienced that, but that's something that happens time and time again from other people that I've talked to as I walk the actual community. Now, I would say this. I would say that transparency and communication is a huge problem in regards to the city communicating with the residents. I know that we say that, if you want to be a part of the process, you should show up. And everyone don't show up because of certain reasons, of course, but they're also not being communicated with effectively enough. This is 2020. The mayor hasn't probably tweeted since 2015, and we need more actual communication that's going out there with the actual community from actual leadership. Real leadership has to inspire you. Real leadership has to galvanize people, and it has to motivate you. And so there's a huge difference. And so as the next mayor, my stance would be very proactive. It'd be very aggressive in the sense that I would be out in the community working with the actual citizens, making sure they are aware of the issues, but also making sure they come to the table. And if not, we're going to do a recap together.
30 seconds.
So after the fact, I would turn my camera on me, and I would create another video so they can get a recap of what actually happened for the families who weren't able to make it to that particular town hall meeting or that city council meeting. We can do more, and we must do more from a leadership perspective when it comes to transparency and communication from leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Now it's time for your questions. So you'll need to come over to the microphone where the questions have been asked. We will have closing statements at 8:30, but until then, we'd like to have questions from you. It would help when you start to state your name and what neighborhood or portion of the city you are from. So please go ahead.
Philip Blackmar, West Pasadena. A question related to the traffic mitigation question earlier. What is the progress in Pasadena of electrification, electric recharge stations, and even hydrogen, perhaps?
Why don't we start with Ms. Godley?
So we have Tesla has invested in a terrific electric charging station. It has been hugely successful, and they are, as I understand it, are looking to see where they can develop more throughout our city. It's my understanding as well that our district has the highest number of Teslas per capita potentially in the world, which is not surprising when you see around the city. Obviously, the move to electric cars is really important. That matters if we can get all of our electricity to renewable sources, which we're moving toward. We need to support the move to electric vehicles. We need to support it for people also of lower incomes. We need to make it more feasible. We need to be thinking about how we build out our infrastructure to support as many
30
people
seconds.
on with electric vehicles. But all those things are things that are going to be ahead of us and that I totally support.
I'm sorry, I forgot, the candidates got told at the beginning, but I did not remind them or tell you, but for this portion, the responses, we're going to ask that the responses be brief, limited to 1 minute. So thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Hardin?
Well, I'll try to keep it short, but our climate action plan actually addresses and incentivizes electric vehicles, so I kind of support that. But I also think it can do a better job. I think if we offer things like free citywide parking for electric vehicles, that might get a lot of people buying electric vehicles really soon. So things like that, we just got to incentivize it more. We got to promote it more. We got to do a better job at marketing these things and just really getting some more buy-in. And as a community, really embracing the wave of the future, and not just in electric vehicles and cars, but also the personal electric vehicles. We have a ban currently on electric personal scooters and stuff like that, and I think that would also help alleviate the on-road traffic issues and on-road transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bell?
Yeah, I think it's great that we have as many electric charging stations as we do. I think we need more. I don't foresee everyone in Pasadena being able to have an electric car. I don't even think that would necessarily be a good thing. I think we need to continue to invest in vehicles that move lots of people, like buses and other types of innovative public transportation. But certainly, if we can get rid of as many combustion engines as possible, absolutely support that. And I'm making sure that our city fleet is converted over to electric, and we have more places for people to plug in. Definitely in favor of that.
Thank you. Mr. Gordo?
So we absolutely are incentivizing more electric vehicles and electric vehicle stations and making that investment, and we need to continue that. We should also encourage more of that from the private sector. I think if we make it more convenient, not just from a government point of view, but in the private sector, at some of the private garages and parking lots, we'll be more successful, and we ought to take that task on.
Thank you, Mr. Gordo. Mr.
Or continue, I should say.
Mr. Madison?
Thank you. Yeah, so as you know, Pasadena operates a municipal utility, a water and power. So this is one of the many issues that we're dealing with from multiple perspectives. You know, it's interesting when you're in the business of running a utility which derives revenue and pays costs through rates, and yet at the same time, the overriding public policy, which is appropriate, is conservation. So you're trying to convince your customers to use less of the product that you need to sell. We absolutely need more electric charging. If you went to the LA Auto Show, I wasn't able to, but I read about it, and apparently every single automaker now is heavily promoting EV, electric vehicles. It's actually a problem with multifamily housing. If there begins to be a high usage, it may outstrip the load that the housing would be able to provide through their existing systems. So we are building hundreds of more stations in Pasadena as a city, and that's good, but not enough. And we also need to look at our zoning codes to begin to build in the capacity that'll be needed. Thank you.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing hundreds of more stations available because I too am a electric car owner. So to see it available more in the actual city is always a good thing. But I also want to gauge it based upon the amount of electric cars that we have as well too. Because one thing I don't want to run into is a situation where we over-purchase using the actual budget ineffectively. And so I want to make sure that we gauge it correctly moving forward and just be smart about it. But I've always supported
30 seconds.
Thank you. I've always supported the electric cars simply because I'm an electric car owner, and I would support us getting more in the future, but it really has to be balanced out with the amount of electric cars that we have in the city, so we just don't have stations that are not being utilized over the city, which would be another scenario like with the bikes that we actually shot ourselves in the foot with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Tornek.
Steve's exactly right. The proliferation or the development of more EVs, electric vehicles, is a home run for the city. It creates customers for our power, it cleans our air, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and on February 25th, we'll be opening the largest electric charging station west of the Mississippi at the Marengo Street Garage. The combination of Tesla's investment and the city's investment. And
30 seconds.
Pasadena only has 5% of our vehicles, District 6 notwithstanding, that are electric, and we can do a lot better, and we're providing incentives to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. And time for our next question. Please.
Yes, my name is Nancy Fraze. I'm in the Madison Heights area. What is being done with the steep pensions which threaten the city to go bankrupt? There was an article recently in the Star News about the city, maybe it's not just the pensions, but the city is threatened with bankruptcy. Thank you.
And we'll start with Mr. Hardin.
Well, currently I'm unfamiliar with a lot of the pension practices with Pasadena, so I can't really get into it with great detail, but I can say that I do believe our benefits package are kind of pricey for us, and I do think our salaries are top heavy. So I would actually try to reduce a lot of our expenses, and especially in regards to the pension packages we offer our employees of the city of Pasadena.
Thank you. Mr. Bell?
Yeah, so I mean, at the State of the City, Mayor Tornek said we're doing great and that the budget is doing well. And I think that our city has been built on the back of public service employees, and that we absolutely should keep good to our promise to secure their pensions and improve the benefits that they receive as we can. They are the lifeblood of our city, and the city doesn't work without our public service employees. And they provide good, sustainable jobs for our residents, and they should not only receive the salary that they've earned, but that their pension should be secure.
Thank you. Mr. Gordo.
So to understand pensions, you have to understand how they're funded. It's a three-legged stool. It involves investment returns with CalPERS. It involves employer contributions and employee contributions. I've supported pension reform that the city has engaged in, every single one. There's no sunlight between me or my colleagues. And in fact, city managers have come to me and asked me to ask employee groups to personally reach out to employee groups and ask employees to pay more, and I've done that successfully on your behalf.
30 seconds.
We also are setting aside money in, I think it's a 117 plan, don't quote me on the exact plan, but it's a plan that will allow the city to pre-fund its pension obligations. I agree the pension is important, but if we can't sustain it, we can't pay it, then employees won't realize the benefits of it. And we need to continue to work on that three-legged stool, including asking our employees to continue to do their part, and they are doing their part, paying more.
Thank you, Mr. Gordo. Mr. Madison?
Yeah, so the financial strength of Pasadena is, as the mayor said at the State of the City, extremely strong. We have worked very hard to manage the finances of the city, and combined with the sales tax initiative that passed overwhelmingly, we now have, instead of what used to be called a structural deficit, and that was, I need to be clear because even some folks on this dais didn't understand that that wasn't an actual deficit. It was looking many years out and projecting that in the future the costs would outstrip the known revenues.
30 seconds.
So that structural deficit is now a structural surplus, looking pretty much out as far as you can into the future. We have reserve funds of approximately $60 million for a rainy day, and we're going to be able to help the school district make the schools better and help the kids with $7 or $8 million a year in revenues directly from the city. So I support the pensions that we have now for our municipal employees. They're not gifts. They contribute to them. They've earned them. And it's wise for all of us to be thinking about how to pay for our retirement.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to sit with this question in many groups here recently, and one of the things that I wanted to kind of reimagine, so to speak, in regards to addressing homelessness and also affordable housing is that with the pension and the workers, we appreciate them, and they are the lifeline and the backbone of the city. But there's also a huge amount of funds that are available in that pot, so to speak. One of the ideals that I propose is that if we put a pause onto paying into that from the budget for a minimum of 5 years, and after those 5 years, we have an opportunity, to use that money to invest into affordable housing, 100% affordable housing versus being beholden to developers, and we have to actually, go with their restrictions or, restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tornek?
So the article that was referenced was an alarmist piece from a single former state senator or state senator that talked about the fact that Pasadena has a lot of debt. And we do. It's intentional debt because we have spent $180 million on the Rose Bowl and $150 million on the power plant, and it's a conscious decision. We have a AAA bond rating. Those of you that really want to be bored to tears but get the answers can go to the city's website and look at my State of the City where I laid this out in great detail. But I will tell you that a better source than that alarmist article is the state auditor. If you go to the state auditor's website, they rank every city in California, and Pasadena is in the moderate category where we belong. We do have a $500 million unfunded debt, unfunded pension obligation, but we've got a strategy to buy that down, and I think we are in good shape financially.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Ms. Godley?
Yeah, so that article was in some ways just factual, saying in California we're the number 9th city in terms of the debt that we carry, and this may be a signal of potential problems down the road. And some economists say no, it's not, and some say that it is, but it just is a fact that of the cities over 50,000, we have the 9th largest amount of debt per capita. So we need to be thinking about that, and those were intentional things. But obviously, debt is an issue that we need to continue to manage. The reason we are able to be a little bit easier about our pension load is because of the sales tax. And that is an important thing that the city passed overwhelmingly.
30 seconds.
And so that is why we're able to do that. We do have to be very careful about our pension load. We need to be thinking, pensions were originally set up with the idea people retired at like 55 and then died at like 65. People are living to like 90 now. So we have to be thoughtful. And as Mr. Gordo said, a promise not fulfilled is not a real promise. So with everyone at the table, we have to be working to make sure we can fulfill these promises about pensions based on actuarial data.
Thank you, Ms. Godley. In order to keep our objective of having closing statements at 8:30, we'll have one more question from the audience.
Good evening. I'm Molly Kennington. I live near Del Mar and Los Robles, which is the hotbed of traffic, I think, in the city, or at least I feel that way. I was at a forum the other night where Mr. Gordo stated that he is not accepting campaign contributions from developers. And this question is directed at Mr. Tornek, not to single him out, but I would like to pose that question to him. Has he been accepting campaign contributions from local, regional developers?
So, Terry, we'll ask you to answer first since it was directed at you, but then everyone else will have a chance to answer as well.
I am accepting contributions from virtually anyone that will offer them, with the exception of municipal employee unions.
Is that Ms. Godley?
I am not accepting contributions from local developers, and I'm also not accepting contributions from municipal unions.
Mr. Hardin?
I personally don't accept contributions from developers, nor do I solicit any type of formal endorsement from any organization. Thank you.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah, no, I don't accept donations from developers. I've actually signed the Tenants Together Big Money Out pledge, in which I've pledged not to accept donations more than $200 from developers.
Mr. Gordo?
So I'm proud of my support from the people who work for us. I'm proud that they trust in my work as an elected member of the City Council, but I will not accept donations from developers, people who are changing the fabric of our city, people who oftentimes don't take into account the input of the people who live in this city. And so I've made very clear that I will not be accepting contributions from developers.
Thank you all. That was quite brief, and you're mighty. I'm sorry, my apologies. Did you want to say something, Steve? Mr. Madison.
So I don't have a policy about not accepting contributions from any group other than anyone who has any business currently pending before the city. Now, I have been endorsed by the police officers and the firefighters, and with those endorsements, there is financial support, and I'm proud of that. One of my opponents said I'm too pro-police. In West Pasadena, we strongly support public safety, and I'm proud they're supporting me as well. In terms of other employee groups...
30 seconds.
Pardon?
30 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of public employee groups, the police and the firefighters are certainly that. I have not yet received any other contributions from public employee groups, but I certainly wouldn't rule them out.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
That's a great question. At this point, maybe you haven't followed me. I'm a long shot, so I'm not having developers line up to throw me any money. So, but I don't have a policy in regards to who would fund my campaign. I'm ambitiously trying to win this election. I'm not in it for show. And so any contributions and help for resources that's on the up and up, for sure, I would use those funds to make sure I can connect with the actual voters and make sure that my message carries throughout the entire city and through District 1 through 7.
Thank you. Now it's time for closing statements. Closing statements are 3 minutes each. Unlike the rest of the program where we've just rotated down the line, in this case, we'll do closing statements in order. First, we'll do the District 6 candidates in alphabetical order, which means we'll begin with Mr. Bell. Mr. Bell, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you again for bearing with us and staying throughout. You are the remnant who have stayed till the end. Thank you so much for your interest and attention. Thank you for welcoming me into this beautiful District 6 for the past many years. I am running for City Council for a number of reasons. I am a tenant. As I understand it, the vast majority of the City Council is made up of landlords, which is, for me, a conflict of interest and something that I would like to see change. I want to represent the part of District 6, the good big chunk of District 6 that is made up of tenants as well. I'm not sure that many people realize that there are quite a few tenants in our district. My experience over the last 2 years is that, 2 years specifically, is that Pasadena isn't working for everyone. And I base that on my experience attending city council meetings over the past 2 years, presenting and standing with my friends and neighbors, presenting heartbreaking stories of gross injustice in their housing situations. And sadly, the city council was unmoved. And it's been a difficult experience to witness that. And that's what made me try to take up this long shot attempt to be a part of the solution by running for city council and presenting a different perspective. I also want to use my closing statement to make a brief comment about police oversight, which was not brought up tonight in the questions, and I think it's interesting that that question didn't come up tonight. I'm not sure why, but I think it's a really important issue. A large part of our city has been pleading for civilian oversight of our police department. And I have to wonder, if you're not in favor of that, why that might be. What harm could there be in having civilians oversee the work of the police department and investigate when there's misconduct? If there's nothing to hide, then I'm sure everything will work out fine. But I think we need to have more transparency on the part of our police department. I think things have improved a little bit, but a lot more needs to be done. And I'm also running on that issue for sure. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
We need new and innovative thinking. Steve, when he ends, he gets the last word here, but he always talks about his experience as though that makes him the only qualified one to be on city council. But when he ran for city council in 1999, he didn't have a lick of experience on city council and felt like he was fully qualified. His change in rhetoric has changed with his circumstances. But I bring a breadth and depth of experience that will enrich the council's relationships and its decision-making. I bring a real knowledge of public education and of our POSD schools. And I can bring those relationships to the City Council to help us collaborate to do better for our kids. I bring real experience with police oversight. I worked on the Rampart Commission, investigating the LAPD and making recommendations for reform. I was one of the lead investigators on the Citizens Commission on Jail Violence, investigating the LA County Sheriff's Department and making recommendations for reform. I served on the Inmate Welfare Commission, addressing issues of recidivism under Sheriff McDonnell. I will bring my experience in democracy building with the National Democratic Institute and inclusion. I will bring the voice of a mother. We don't have term limits, so we have to decide when enough time has passed. Everyone has gifts and weaknesses. We've had the benefits and the downsides of Steve's gifts and gaps for 20 years. It's time for a change. And it's time for a change for another really important reason. Look at this dais. One woman. This is every Monday night at our city council meeting. We have one woman's voice. That should not be happening in the city of Pasadena. We have the opportunity to change that with this election. The UN has started an initiative to accelerate the election of women to political office. They've done a study, and at our current rate in the United States, it will be more than 100 years before we have gender parity in our elected offices. That's way too long for my daughter Tiffany. That's way too long for your daughters and your granddaughters. We can accelerate that change now. We need a smart, kind, respectful, energetic, and responsive woman to represent District 6. I look forward to earning your support, and I look forward to being your city council person.
Thank you, Ms. Godley. Mr. Madison.
Thank you. Well, I do want to take this opportunity to thank WPRA and also Madison Heights and LVAA for sponsoring this forum tonight. The neighborhood associations are a great feature of Pasadena in terms of civic engagement. The last time I counted, we had 96 active neighborhood associations, which is extraordinary for a city of our size. And the work that the neighborhood associations does is phenomenally important. And when we sit in council, we rely on the work that you do and the counsel that you bring us from the neighborhood associations. And it's complex. The issues that we deal with are complex. I actually do have a master's degree from the USC, the School of Policy and Planning. And I mean, you read the newsletter from WPRA, that could be a final exam for that school. The work that we do at City Council is similarly important and complex. And even just the discussion tonight, you look at the breadth and depth of the issues that we have to deal, from running a football stadium owning golf courses, running a municipal water and power, issues of police and fire and the budget and the convention center and on, housing, affordable housing, homelessness, the problems of that. This is a complex municipal environment for those who serve the city. At the end of the day, though, great neighborhoods is what make a great city. And West Pasadena has great neighborhoods, and we aim to keep them great. And in the work that I've done on the city council, unlike respectfully my opponents, I have a record for you to judge. Look at what we've been able to accomplish together. It's easy to talk, but getting things done, especially on an 8-member city council where there's no tie-breaking mechanism, is extremely difficult. And look what we've been able to accomplish together. We fought the encroachment on local zoning by the state. We killed the 710 extension. We saved San Rafael School when the school district was ready to close it. We created a new park and affordable housing at Desideria. We turned Linda Vista School, which when the district closed it, we took those lemons and made lemonade and made it a new public city park. We rebuilt Fire Station 39. Fire safety is extremely important to our district, and the city was ready to close it, and we invested millions and rebuilt that station and even kept it open in a local residence when we were doing the construction. I've already mentioned the John Vandekamp Bridge and the finances of the city that are now strong, and so now we'll be able to give the school district millions in aid. I'm extremely proud of all of the endorsements that I've received, and none prouder than my friend Bill Bogart, our former mayor. I'm deeply honored by that. My good friend Adam Schiff, our congressman, hundreds of others. But I'd be really honored to have your support as well as we move forward to look at the new challenges together, like the 50-acre stump, keeping the Rose Bowl sound without overusing
Thank you, Mr. Madison.
The One Arroyo plan that Bill and Doug are working on. Thank you.
Those were our District 6 candidates. Now for the mayoral candidates, we'll start with Mr. Gordo.
Thank you. The Pasadena faces complex issues. This election is about citywide leadership, and I have a 20-year record of addressing complex issues throughout this city, twice the record of any of my opponents. It's also about consensus building on the city council, and I'm proud to have former Mayor Bill Bogart as chairman of my campaign together with Doug Cranwinkle. I'm not a developer. I'm not a planning director. I'm an attorney. I represent people, not plans. You can be sure that with me as mayor of this city, it will never be my way or the highway. I have a record of 20 years of listening very closely to people and then building consensus to resolve issues. But this forum is sponsored by LVAA and Madison Heights and West Pasadena. So let's talk about my record. Ambassador College, I was there and did the right thing to ensure we protected neighborhoods. The NFL, I'm likely the only elected official in the entire country who said no to the NFL first in 2004. And then I opposed the NFL initiative together with many of you in this room. I then, in 2015, personally asked the RBOC to remove the Rose Bowl as an alternative, even on a temporary basis. The 710 tunnel, every single one of my votes has been against the 710 tunnel. Starting in 2001 when I said no concrete canyon through our city. Then there was that was the 710 freeway. Then there was the 710 tunnel. The mayor of this city is one vote, but a very important vote. On December 10th, 2012, voted against the tunnel, voted to make Pasadena's position a no position on the tunnel. My opponent, the incumbent mayor of this city, refused to take a position and make Pasadena's position a no vote. That then was repeated in 2015 when the city, and many of you were in the room, hundreds of people at the convention center, when we said no way to the 710 tunnel. By a bare majority, I was the swing vote, the fifth vote needed to make the city's official position no on the tunnel. I was there. My opponent, our incumbent mayor, refused to make the city's position no on the tunnel. There's an example of where votes matter, where leadership matters. we're looking out for the best interest of this city matters, and we're casting your vote in the best interest of the city and the people of this city mattered, because our vote became no, and Pasadena, in the face of litigation, in the face of the state, made it clear that we were not going to allow our city to be divided, and the impacts of traffic and everything else that would have come with that tunnel, environmental issues, were not going to be imposed on us by anyone, including the state of California.
Mr. Hardin.
Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you to all of you for being here and for staying for the duration of this forum. And I appreciate the effort you guys put into creating such a comprehensive forum, and the fact that you guys aren't afraid to have us sit here till 9 o'clock is wonderful also, because that just shows the dedication. Like I said, one thing I do feel in this room is I feel that everybody loves this city. Everybody loves this community. And what I tell folks is I'm not running to represent the city of Pasadena. I'm running to represent the people of Pasadena. We have a city manager. We have city attorneys that do a great job of representing the city. So I want to represent the people because, like I said, we're underrepresented sometimes. And sometimes our leaders give in to the influences of people that back their campaigns and support them. And I don't have any attachments like that. You know, all I do is ask the questions and base my vote on all the information presented. And as senior commissioner, when I was on the commission, I did that a lot. When I got there, we had vacancies on the commission, and we had one city staff that was just taking notes. When I left, we had a couple city staff, and we had recording devices, because I would request so much presentations and so much information that they had to have a different way of recording it accurately. And I believe that's the level of energy it takes. You know, I don't have the best responses and I don't have the best answers, but I can ask the best questions, and that's the power of the leaders in our community. That's the power of your city council member. That's the power of your mayor. It's in the access they have to the information and the access and the availability they can have to making it available to you guys. And in a public forum, that's a powerful thing. You know, getting the truth is a powerful thing. I believe there's some questions that avoid being answered and avoid being asked because, like I said, they had a term said by Miss Jackie Robinson, and I never forget, I interviewed her for my magazine, and she said she was much more effective her second term than her first term because she knew where the bodies were buried. You know, so, and that, I don't know if you know, but that means you know where not to poke. But me, I don't have those reservations. I dig everywhere. I ask a lot of questions, and what comes up comes up. And if the truth comes up, that's how we find out embezzlement going on. That's how we find out the wrongdoings that are going on, through the questions and through discovery. And I believe that I can do that. I believe that I have the initiative, the energy, and just a general curiosity to represent the community, to represent the average person who doesn't have it all, who doesn't have all the knowledge, who didn't go through all the paperwork, but can have the opportunity right now to learn. And there's nothing I do faster than learn. And I also believe that you'll never find greatness in your comfort zone. So to be a truly great city, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable at times. We have to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. We have to be willing to be the only one that looks like us in a room, in an environment. And we do just have to, like I said, put ourselves in other people's shoes so we can really empathize and relate to others. And because you guys invited me out of my comfort zone, I would love to invite you out of yours. February 3rd, I'm hosting a screening of our documentary film called Pasadena, Exploring Solutions to Reduce Gang Violence, and I would love for you to see that film because it's about more than gang violence in our community. It's about our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Mr. Tornek.
Thank you. And thank you for staying. You really deserve a round of applause from us. When I ran 4 years ago, I was focused on 5 issues: making Pasadena financially strong, supporting the PUSD, safeguarding the environment, protecting the quality of life in the neighborhoods, and reducing crime. And I think I've delivered on all of those things. They need more work. I'm not suggesting that the work is done, but I think I've demonstrated ability to perform. And in listening to what people are telling me as I walk the city, we now have new issues to confront, and some of them we've talked about tonight: homelessness, state intervention in land use planning, and planning for the 710 ditch and what can happen for the city going forward. I think I'm well qualified to deal with all those, but I'd like to end my remarks by talking about the 710, because that's what a lot of the people in this room care about. For 60 years, people have been fighting the 710. And there are a lot of people that were much earlier to the party than I was. I wasn't even engaged in city government or even here when that fight started. But the way that the 710 was ultimately defeated was when some of us realized that we needed to let the EIR get completed, let Caltrans finally have an opportunity to demonstrate that the EIR was complete and couldn't use as an excuse. And I concluded that having that in place and then being able to count to 7 on the Metro Board, lining up 7 votes on the Metro Board, was the way that after all the skirmishing and fighting and litigation is the way that the 710 would finally be terminated. And that's what I did. In terms of reaching out to other people in the San Gabriel Valley, I persuaded John Fasana from Duarte to come over to our side, even though he supported the 710, because I convinced him that it could never get funded, and it was an impediment to getting badly needed transportation changes made in the region. So he came over. I talked with Catherine Barger and finally convinced her to join Ara Nazarian from Glendale. That's the hard work. That's understanding, not just a matter of standing up in public meetings and beating your chest and saying that you support a particular point of view, but understanding how the game really works and what it takes to achieve success. And so we got a unanimous vote on the Metro Board.
30 seconds.
And that's what stopped the 710 ultimately, the vote on the Metro Board. Because after that, we were in a position to go, and I went to Anthony Portantino and to Chris Holden and asked for the legislation to demap that road. So when you talk about the skill set that's required to actually make things happen, in this case, a struggle that this neighborhood in South Pasadena were doing for 60 years, I know how to make that happen, and I think I've demonstrated it. I hope that you will give me a chance to continue and re-elect me on March 3rd. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tornek. Mr. Williams.
So this has been very inspiring to see so many people actually come here and also actually to stay. So I'm very appreciative for this platform to be able to share, to hear the questions, but more importantly, just to express a different point of view and a different perspective. You know, running a campaign, being a new politician or new to public service, what I've learned is that, especially when you're going against an incumbent and someone else that's experienced, through conversation, of course, by actually going through that, they actually have a better conversation in regards to the issues and some of the dealings that they've actually worked with. For me, that's no different than being next to a poet who speaks very greatly but doesn't know how to make a dollar, which is what I'm really good at. So what I'm proposing is to have an open mind in regards to what your selective process is now and also moving forward. Because you've been a part of something for a certain amount of time doesn't necessarily mean that you're right for the job moving forward. As I stated in this campaign, I actually respect everyone up here on this panel, but I also took the time to go out and speak to different communities and actually put in the work and I was the first candidate to actually run. That's how important it was for me. I was the first candidate to put my name in the hat because I knew this was the most important election in Pasadena's history for multiple reasons. And so I wanted to go out there and understand what the issues were. Of course, homelessness was the top one. I have some ideas on how we can face that. Affordable housing is, of course, is another key topic. But the difference between someone like myself is that I'm a problem solver. I'm a person that's not afraid to go in any room and navigate the room and to gain consensus and galvanize people. Just because I haven't been in public service doesn't exclude me. You know, I've been dealing with a lot in regards to dealing with a lot of great things in regards to people supporting me. But I've also heard the tone of, how do you feel like you can be mayor of this city if you've never been mayor before? It doesn't make sense to me. I've been playing politics my entire life for 20 years. I've been successful. I grew up in the projects in poverty, and I built myself up through my mentality, but also not just by myself. I have thousands of testimonials that'll walk in here right now and tell you how I've changed their lives. Leadership now, currently today in 2020, has to be about who can galvanize you, who can inspire your 14-year-old grandchild or your 25-year-old son. There's a difference. It's a different texture that we're looking for moving forward. We're not saying, hey, you didn't do a good job, thank you, but pass the baton. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes. Thank you to all the candidates. And thank you to you for staying. Now, you have seen the whole program, but if you have friends or other people who want to see it, it will be available on KPAS next week. We'll have information on that put out in a WPRA special update. But to say good night, I'll ask Dan Beal to come up.
And I want to thank Blaine for a terrific job of moderating. Thank our candidates once again for their time and their insights. I think we've all learned a lot tonight from them. Thank you one more time. And thank yourselves for hanging in with us. I appreciate it. There's one important thing I want to leave you with, since we're talking about an election. The voting process has changed in California at the city level, the state level, the different times to vote, different ways to vote, and the national political parties have different rules for voting in their primaries. So don't disenfranchise yourself by not knowing how and when to do this. You can go on the City of Pasadena's website, the city clerk's section. You can go on the LA County Register of Voters section to learn more about it. Anyway, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's been a terrific evening.